Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Orko here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gawn, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Just a couple of weeks left to go in your fantasy footy season. Hello, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. Yeah, 7 games. 7 rounds of 9 games of football. That's bad math from me right there, hey? But there's a lot to talk about this week. And joining me on this episode, as he has a couple of times right throughout your 2022 fantasy footy season, I got Jordox. Hello, buddy. How are you?
Very well, MJ. Very excited to be on ahead of another very big round of fantasy footy.
There is a lot we got to get through. It all gets underway Thursday night and then rolls through into multiple games on the Sunday. So depending on the time you're listening to this, your Thursday teams are probably out. If not, they're about to be. But let's be honest, the big names we're all hanging on for are Gawn and Jackson, and Simon Goodwin has already confirmed that they will be playing. On this episode, Jordox, a couple of things I want to cover for coaches. I do want to talk about the returning big premium 3. And what I mean by that is Gawn, English, and next week Bailey Smith. I want to talk about what we should or shouldn't be doing with those 3 arguably best 22 options we want to get. I want to look at some players that, based on fixture, price, role, unique ownership, that you and I think could be ripping options to get. But before we get there, I want to talk about some guys, Jordox, that I think we need to seriously consider moving off, because it does come to this point of the year, mate, doesn't it, where guys that have been good, even maybe great at some points in the year, have started to slow a little bit for one reason or another. But before we do, Jordox, what are some of the reasons, rather than let's talk about the players for a sec, what are some of the caveats and reasons we might consider jumping off of a player?
Well, the obvious one would be, when a player returns from a long-term injury, that the player you've got was taking that role. You know, when there's a role change in the season, it can always revert back. The guys I've looked at, the caveat would be, how's your squad looking? The guys I'm going to talk about jumping off, you would only do if your squad is pretty much finished, and now you're looking at how to maximise the primos you've already got.
Yeah, I think you're right. The variance we always talk about on a lot of these podcasts is, what's the format you play? What is your focus? Is it league or is it rankings? If it's a limited trade formats, what are the remaining amount of trades you've got left to go? And then lastly, what's your level of bench cover like to avail you through these final 7 weeks? So based on those 7 variables, we'll throw out some guys that do need to be looked at. Who have you got first? Give us, I know you've got a couple there. I got a couple as well. Who are a couple of guys that, if you're in the luxurious position to move them off, you're going to seriously look at moving these guys away from your side?
Yeah. So one is a guy I wasn't all that keen on in pre-season, and then I grabbed him anyway, and he's had a fantastic year. This isn't for Supercoach, by the way,
okay.
This particular player. This would be a Dream Team AF move, and it's James Sicily, who, averaging 95 in those formats, has had an excellent year. He's not going to hurt you on field. He's scoring 80s every week, but his ceiling just hasn't really been there.
Nothing over 120 this year in AF?
No, not even over. Oh, he got a 118 earlier in the year. But yeah, just look in the last 5 weeks, he's had the one in the last 6 weeks rather, the 1 ton and a bunch of 80s. So very reliable. He's not someone that's going to stress you out. But if you can move him on to another big dog, look at a Doherty. If you've avoided him, he's going to come down in price.
Mm-hmm.
There's just some other options there that are going to go bigger in the run home. And the question you've got to ask when you look at, am I axing a primo at this time of year? Do you think that primo will be in the top 6 or top 8, top 10 of that position for the run home?
The remaining.
And Sicily's got a great matchup this week against our Crowies.
Mm-hmm.
But he's one I would look at sideways if your side is looking good.
Yeah, I don't mind that shit. You're right. Supercoach, it's blasphemy to look at moving him on.
Yeah,
but
no chance.
In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, if all the ifs line up, I think he's going to go probably about 90 for the next 7 weeks, which is fine. Perfectly fine if you've got a hold. But if you're in the luxurious position to make some manoeuvres, don't hate it. Definitely don't hate it. I got one before I let you have another one. For me, it feels fairly obvious, but it is luxurious. That's Patrick Cripps. In his first 7 games of the year, even taking that sub-affected hamstring tweak, minor adjustment, whatever it was you wanted to say he had in that game, in his first 7 games of the year, he went 127 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 142 in Supercoach. In his last 7 games, he's going 88 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 96 in Supercoach. And in losses this year in AFL Fantasy, he's going 88, and in Supercoach it's 93. Here's the run home for the Blues. It's not the worst, but it's also not the easiest. A very improved West Coast. Who would have thought we'd ever say that this week? Then Geelong, Giants, both very midfield dominant teams. And then the final 3 games of the year are interesting. It's Brisbane, Melbourne, and dare I even say it, Collingwood. So it's not the easiest of fixtures for them. I would say probably outside of their games against the Crows. They'd probably mark that down for a win, even though it is at Adelaide Oval. And they would expect to beat West Coast, even though it is over at Optus Stadium. For me, there's just enough trend for it to be negative that, again, it's the luxurious trade that if I could make the move, I'd jump off. Because what he was doing at the start of the year, Jordox, was unsustainable. It was 35 touches, 5 or 6 tackles, 5 or 6 marks, 2 or 3 goals a game. Like, that's just not sustainable for anyone.
He was early in the season, he was tracking for the Brownlow-Coleman double.
Yeah.
Kicking that many goals. And he actually hasn't kicked a goal in his last 3 games. He's getting plenty of touches.
Yeah, correct.
Always handball happy, Cripper. The tackling is still there. I mean, it was on the weekend.
Yep.
But, yeah, he's getting the touches. He's just not getting the marks.
It's just the extra peripheral things, isn't it? There's not as much goals. There's not as many marks. There's a little more of the other full midfield complement are starting to be around. So, again, it's luxurious because, like I said, the last 7, 96 in Supercoach isn't shocking, and neither is an 88, 89 in AFL Fantasy. Not shocking, but when you're wanting to get onto guys that can go 105, 110, 115 over these last 7 weeks, is Cripps likely to do that? Sure. But for me, if I had the luxury, I'd look to move him on.
He's held his value too.
Yeah.
That's another thing. You know, when these guys have dropped, huge amounts of money, you've got to really evaluate whether it's worth it. But with a guy like Cripps who still has held some value, you can sideways or drop a 50, 60K on his head to get one of the big boys.
Yeah. All right. Give me your last guy that, again, if you're in the luxurious position of your team being in a certain position and trades are aplenty and depth is solid, what are you looking to move on?
Oh, it's pretty harsh, but Jaden Short has moved into the midfield and has gone the opposite way in his scoring.
Definitely an AFL fantasy.
Yeah, of course. Earlier in the year, he was getting those high mark tallies that was helping him hit some really super, super high scores. And now in the midfield, he's just getting the quick kicks. He's more of a contested player now. And, I mean, it's been a fascinating sort of change for him. I didn't think he had this in him. And I imagine Tiger fans would be pretty happy to see him in the guts. He's such a good player and he goes hard. But for us fantasy coaches, his scoring is quite similar to Cripps in DT and fantasy in the last 5 weeks. And look, you'd be, like I said, your side's got to be absolutely humming to make a move like that. But he's very, very commonly owned, so it is a play to move him on.
That's probably more the play, isn't it? Because he's still, I think in the last 3 weeks, he'd still be top 10 defender based on rolling average. But what you're probably banking against is the fact that he's so highly owned. I think 1 in 3, 1 in 4. Yeah, closer to 1 in 3 coaches own him. You're trying to get 5 to 10 points of separation off the pack, off that one maneuver, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, one to look at.
Yeah, I don't mind it. Look, in Supercoach, 5 of his last 7 games have been between 82 and 88 as well. So he's certainly dropped away from where he was probably the safest 110-plus defender every week in Supercoach, where he's only had one score over 110 since round 8, which is really when the role really moved for him outside of that West Coast game the week before. So I agree. I think he's been very, very good. But maybe if all things being equal, you can move him on. I don't hate it. The one I think's the most obvious one is Darcy Cameron, where at least 1 week left. There's a chance Grundy gets a VFL game or 2, but I can't see it being any more than that. He's been one of the best buys of the year, without doubt. And even though Collingwood have a great fixture, and we'll talk about that in a sec when we look at guys to trade into your fantasy football sides, the reality for it, Jordox, I think, is this. Grundy is one of the best ruckmen in the league when fit. Period. You do not choose, as good as the Cameron and Cox combination may have been at pockets this year, you do not leave when you're pushing for finals one of the premier ruckmen, even out of form. He is still 50 million times better footballer than Mason Cox, and that enables Darcy Cameron, who's quite an accomplished forward, to play forward a little bit more. So I don't buy any of the narrative that people say, oh, they'll play Grundy more forward and give Cox the number 1 role. No, they won't. It's going to be Grundy. So for me, it is have your plans ready. And even if it means you're jumping off a week early to be certain you can make the move, he becomes your ticket to those 3 guys that we alluded to at the top of the podcast. The Bailey Smiths, the Tim Englishes, the Max Gawns, the guys you probably do want to have in your final side. He's your easy ticket to those guys in terms of the money he's made. So for me, the moment Grundy's named, absolutely you need to abort out of Darcy Cameron as an option for you. But I wouldn't be opposed to jumping off early. That's for sure.
Particularly with the value. That is the ultimate cash out.
Yeah.
Those that jumped on when Grundy went down, if you cash out at the right time, the money you would have made, and the points on field, of course, it's one of the players of the year. Well done to you if you did it.
It's he's 540k in Supercoach right now. So you make money, just as an illustration, you make money trading him to Christian Petrarca.
Wow. I was thinking more in DT and AF going, if he's in your forward line, down to a Taranto.
Yeah, and again, in AFL fantasy, you make 50k from Cameron down to Taranto.
Amazing. Who would have thought that, hey?
So let's talk about those 3 guys then while we're there. Max Gawn confirmed to play this week alongside Luke Jackson, which was a popular trade-in 2 weeks ago when many were staring down a donut in their ruck division. Thank you, Braden Pruce, amongst others, for mentioning that. There's your 1 per podcast, friends. I got him in there.
We're not talking about it.
I just need to do 1 per podcast, to win. Tim English, another, the Bulldogs have already confirmed, will play this week, while next week, back off his 4-week suspension, Bailey Smith is there. So maybe all 3 need to be treated differently based on formats and positional availability. But Jordox, for you, are these 3 guys, are you still fighting to create space and margin to get them into your side over the next 2 to 4 weeks?
I don't think you should make your plans strictly to getting these guys in. If I look at the 3 of the bit, let's just leave Luke Jackson out for the time being. But the 3 big ones in Gawn, English and Smith, from where I sit, I think English is a lock. I have no.
So you'd make him the number 1 trade priority out of those trio?
I would.
Yep.
I think he's the one that has already shown us this year, after a big spell out of the game, he comes in and dominates. So that's that. The concern I have with Gawn and Smith, so Gawn first would be just how good Luke Jackson was in that one game. And different to what you were saying about Grundy before in relation to Cameron, and which I really agree with, is Gawn can play forward and he can be moved around the ground.
Yep.
And I think there is a chance that Melbourne will bring him back in. Oh, well, they are bringing him back in. But bringing him back in, and I think we might see a more even split in the ruck between him and Jackson for two reasons. One, the way Jackson played, and, he was so dynamic in that game. He really brought a different sort of style to the game than Gawn does. And then the second point is, Gawn, he's keen to get back, and they wouldn't rush him back. But I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to just ease him into the next few weeks, because they need him raring to go in September. So with all that said, Gawn, I think I'd like to have a look at him first this week.
Okay, so you're not prepared to jump blind on Gawn, but you could be. And again, if someone's like, I've got the money for one of these two big guys, because Smith isn't available for us this week, I could get English or Gawn. You're saying, without knowing the other variants, English is the one that you'd be happy to jump blind onto.
I do, because even if you get it not wrong, but even if you decide, I still want Gawn, you can do that if you trade a forward for Gawn and then swing English. So that DPP is probably what helps English there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair shout. We know English is probably the more prone to injuries and knocks and missing games. We've seen him miss multiple this year, whereas Gawn, for the better part of his career, has been bulletproof in terms of his health and finding a way to push through. So I think you're right. I think if you can only get one this week, English is the guy. It's interesting to me how coaches will find a way to get Gawn in, and what will they do to do it. And the reason I say that, the caveat is, over the past few weeks, we've been seeing coaches jumping into guys like Goldstein, O'Brien, Darcy, and Luke Jackson, who we alluded to be able to navigate the loss of English and Gawn and Bruce and Teakle not being available for us. So for me, it's going to be fascinating to see teams that are relatively quote-unquote complete now, what the gap they believe will be from Gawn over these next 7 weeks. Because it's not Gawn versus, let's use O'Brien as an example in DT and AF. The gap between what O'Brien and Gawn does over the next 7 weeks is probably, I think, 10 to 15 points per game Gawn's way overall. Just as a base, average kind of go, let's say O'Brien's a 90 and Gawn's a 105 guy. Yeah, okay, so is that worth the trade? Well, maybe, but remember, you banked the 120 last week of O'Brien. So now you've already 120 points ahead. So even if Gawn was to go, again, this is purely AFL Fantasy and Dream Team I'm talking about, even if Gawn was to go 15 points better per game, what is that? 80, 90 points over the year?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, 110 points over the year? Sure. You're already ahead just on that one trade alone. And so I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see how people, and again, it's format dependent, because in AFL Fantasy, 2 trades a week, use it or lose it, doesn't matter. Whereas Supercoach and Dream Team, the conserving of trades can be very, very viable and vital strategy to play. So Gawn's a very interesting one.
Look at the time of the year. I mean, what round are we entering now? Round 17.
17, yeah.
And, if Gawn takes a few weeks to really get back to his usual self,
sure.
I mean, you've got a month left. If you traded Gawn to O'Reilly O'Brien or Sean Darcy, you had to, in the back of your mind, think, I may have to run with that ruck guy
for the year.
Because too many other things come up. Having said all that, Gawn is the type of guy that could come out Thursday night this week, and go bang, and everyone's scrambling to get him. So
100%.
If you get him first, you're a week ahead of everyone. But I'm keen to have a look.
Yeah, look, the matchups from a Melbourne perspective, if you're looking at the rucks, Geelong, Port Adelaide, Bulldogs, Fremantle, Collingwood, Carlton, Brisbane.
Yeah.
So
it's there. If you compare to, say, O'Reilly O'Brien, who has had some really nice scores against sides that have weak ruckmen, or in some cases no ruckmen, which is always handy. Like this week comes up against young Ned Reeves at the Hawks. Then he has Collingwood, which may just be Cameron still. Sydney, Hickey's pretty good, but you can't pick them. Carlton, Pitnet might be back. West Coast have Nick Nat back. North, and then Port. So I'm not convinced even that 10, 15 points a week Gawn over Rob is actually going to happen. But we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes down to. If you're an AFL fantasy coach, it's then just running the narrative, because that's what I think we often, maybe this is me getting on my hobby horse for a second, but I watch people that captained Mills last week absolutely lose their mind on social media, but the narrative behind why they put the captaincy on Mills was right. He went 150 odd, I think it was, across the formats against them less than 2 months ago. Midfielders have scored well against them. Mills has got a proven ceiling about him, even a 200 already this year. So the narrative was there. It's just the variable elements outside of your control weren't.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at guys like Gawn to trade into, or an English to trade into, or in a week or two's time, Bailey Smith, it's got to be the narrative, because if the narrative holds strong that this is my logic, this is my reason, this is my plan, is it strong? Because if the answer is yes, confidently make the trade. If it's not, that's fine. So when people are going, I don't like Mills, it's like, well, no one could have predicted that amount of volatility and positioning of Mills. We've seen him move back, but we haven't seen him flung forward, wing and back and centre bounce all in one game. That's what we got. It means Mills can't be a pure captaincy option for me for the rest of the year. Vice captain's fine, but not a captain for those reasons.
That score from Mills, pure and simple, was a gift to non-owners. It's all.
Of course.
Because, he had no right to score that. And for anyone that captured him, no one has the right to say, why'd you make him captain? I mean, that's the game. It happens.
The narrative is the key. And I'll bring that back to the point for someone like a Tim English. You made a really good point, Jordox. He's shown multiple times this year, coming back off a layoff, he just picks up right where he's left off. Gawn's got the ability and Supercoach to be the number one scorer from now to the end of the year. Genuinely does. And so there could be merit in trading out whoever you put into R2 for that very reason. It's all just got to be, what's the logic, what's the reason, what's the narrative, what's my focus, what's my objective. Once you can work your way through those things, it should clear the muddy waters of whether or not you should trade or you should hold. Those are big things. Yeah, and Bailey Smith's the same in a week's time. He's not been injured. He's just suspended. So he's training all the way through. I'd very happily leap blind into Bailey Smith.
Yeah, it's hard to argue. And I think I'm, a bit more tentative. I've been burnt in recent weeks with some of the trades I've made on guys coming back. Bailey Smith, he is the sort of guy that could come back as if, he didn't miss a beat. The only thing with him is, our forward lines are pretty full, and I don't know about you, but my forward line's getting pretty full of players from the same team.
It's very Bulldog heavy.
Has a monopoly on the full forward line. Even someone like Libber. I mean, Libber.
He's a ripper.
We said Tom Liberatore. He's someone in any other year we'd all be trying to get him in. I haven't heard his name mentioned once in the last month. But the thing with having so many from the same team, it can be fine. It can be okay. But the chances of all of them scoring a ton in the 1 week, it's minimal compared to, say, having a spread from other clubs. The thing I do like about all those dogs from a head-to-head, what am I saying? The leagues focused, sorry. They have Hawthorn down in Tassie in the grand final, round 23. So
it's not a bad.
Feel free to load up. But yeah, Smith, I think the other thing on him coming back is that it's always the same thing with the Bulldogs, is how many mouths they have to feed. And I don't know if he comes straight back in and gets the role he had a month ago, or does he ply his trade on the half-forward flank, moving up into rotations for a couple of weeks?
Yep.
I don't know. I just, with the Bulldogs, with Bevo, with the amount of guns they have, he's another I probably myself personally would like to just sit and wait 1 week. And don't forget, his last game in DT and fantasy was a 63. That wasn't injury affected, just had a dirty night. So my point being, waiting has its benefit because you get a look, and then the other benefit is you're going to get him cheaper than if you jumped into him straight away. So yeah, he's one I'd look at in a few weeks. He'll be a bargain.
He will be a bargain. If you can wait till round 19, 20 and get him for the final four, you're right. You're going to get him at his lowest point outside of his starting price for the year. Let's look at some guys, though, that we could look to trade in. I think there's always a couple of variables when we're going to list a bunch of names in a sec to wrap up the episode. There's always variances, things like a team's fixture on the run home, the price point, a player's role, which you alluded to already, Jordox, at the top of the episode. But before we look at some of the players, what's interesting to me to note is the actual ladder makes a difference. Because what we will see is we will see teams that are competing for the final few spots in the bottom part of the top 8, or even pushing for top 4, going all out for it. What we will see is AFL teams that are out of finals contention and are not in a coaching insecure space look to open up some attempts to do something a little bit different. I bring that up for probably right at the front of that is a team like GWS. They're 4 games out of finals as we speak right now. I can't see them making finals. They have to go and win every game from now through to the end of the year, and they play Port Adelaide, Brisbane, Carlton, Sydney, Essendon, the Bulldogs, and Fremantle. They're not winning all 7 games. 5, I think, is the best I have them going, but I can't see them winning all 7 games. So it'll be interesting what does that mean for a Taranto, for example. How does the balance of Hopper, who played in the VFL, what do they do? Now, they're auditioning McVeigh for a coach, so they might not be the perfect example. But a Port Adelaide, they drop probably 3 out of the next 7. They're no chance of making finals. The Bulldogs are probably 3 games down and they're out. What does that mean they do through there? So that's just the variance to talking in and around certain players. Because if you jump on certain premiums and teams get experimental, that's where it could really hurt you, or to a lesser extent, help you.
Yep. And I think, as you said, GWS, you can, because they've got that interim coach, which we've probably kind of got to remind ourselves that happened so early in the season, as early as I can remember. And he's been pretty good, McVeigh. The Giants have looked pretty good with him. So I could see GWS being treated as a team right in finals contention, even though they're clearly
just
not.
because he's pushing for a coaching job.
He's auditioning, as you said.
Yep.
And then look, there's lots to consider with the teams that are going to miss finals. You know, older players being put in for surgery, getting little things sorted out. The first one that made me nervous when you mentioned the Bulldogs could be out of contention in a couple of weeks is, you know, someone like Bontempelli. We heard about he had a shoulder concern earlier in the year.
Yeah.
I do think, for me, sometimes I can overthink these things.
Sure.
So if there's a player you like, and we'll reel off a few shortly. If there's a guy you like, and then their side is out of contention, just go for it. If the role's there, if you think that player is going to have a good 4 or 5 week run, don't let fixturing or, you know, position on the ladder for their club deter you. Let it be something. If you can't split 2 players, well, this team is still in contention, this team isn't, 50-50, I'll go with that one, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. All right, I got 5 players. I think 1 or 2 of them might be yours. I got 5 players I'd be happy to tell someone to go look at. Again, it might be depending on price, value, position, fixture, all of those, even ownership percentages. How many names have you got for us there, Jordox?
I have got 2, 4, 6, 8, around a dozen. But what I'll do is I've got, I won't do them all. I've got guys that are probably a bit more obvious and absolute potential to be top primos, but I've also got some guys that it's almost if you're getting desperate and you're trying to pick an absolute diamond in the rough. So maybe budget guys, just some role changes I've noticed. Perhaps if you're playing draft and, you know, you're looking for a guy to ride home.
Okay. All right. There you go. There's a little bit of all things to all people for us through there. So, all right. Fair enough. Give me two of your faves you'd be telling people to trade into then.
Yeah, so Jack Steele, get on, all aboard. He's cheap. He's as cheap as he's going to be, and he is going to finish similar to last year. I think he's just going to go gangbusters.
Yep.
He's missed a bit of footy. He's a young, fit captain of the side in a finals run, and he's done 19 tackles in 2 games. It's just, a bit of an obvious one. The other one is Ben Keys for the Crows. Nice. A fair bit's been said in fantasy circles about the Crows run home, having some favourable matchups, which I agree with. I don't think you can touch Laird. I mean, he's about to crack the million in fantasy and DT. Yeah, amazing effort.
Yeah, he and Dawson, I think, are in that same spot. It's I'm all for paying up for guys when they're killing it, but they're not unique.
Keys can match
Keys
Laird
is the one.
just about in the next 5-6 weeks, and he is heaps cheaper. So there are a couple at the top.
I like that. Well, Keys, he's going 110 or 123 in his last 2 in AFL fantasy, because that's a format I'd probably jump on. He was going 115 in the first 7, and he's under 800k. So the only risk there is if the Crows double dip on Matt Crouch again, and that'll really hurt him. But I'd be really surprised if the Crows go there. There's nothing to gain by bringing Crouch back into that side. We're seeing Berry emerge. We're seeing Schonberg finally add a little bit of a different mix in there. There's no benefit. They're going to get nothing more than a 3rd-round pick for him when they trade him, should I say. So for me, I think that's a really fair shout. If you are in the pricey market of spending up, in Supercoach only, I'd be okay to spend up on Tom Liberatore. So he's 575k. So he's on the more expensive side of life in Supercoach. Gone 107 for the year, 121 in his last 3. But in his last 8, his lowest score is 92. The rest are tons, and they've included a 123, 128, and 144. The reason I bring him up is not just because he's forward eligible, but the fact is he's in just 5% of teams. Under 8,000 people in Supercoach own Tom Liberatore, and he's one of the best forwards. Because again, back to the point I made a few minutes ago about narrative, why and how did he get forward status? He was building his fitness base as a forward inside forward 50, coming off an interrupted preseason. Over the past 8 weeks, since that fitness base has come, what have been some of the scores you've seen? Amazing, back to his best centre bounce midfielder. Clearance, pressure, tackles. For me, it's expensive, yes, but you're now paying into one of, if not one of the best forwards for the run home. So for me...
And a great point of difference too. I mean, we talk about jumping on Bailey Smith next week. If you go the other way to Libba, that could be a great move. Do you think I reckon he's almost in danger of being tagged soon. He's been that good.
Look, it's always a risk with a player of his caliber to get that. And but then it's do you leave Bont to go and damage you?
No, of course.
So it all depends on matchups.
That comment was less about deterring you from getting Libba, more about how well the guy's going.
100%.
Time into him.
100%. Well, Sydney, St Kilda, Melbourne, Geelong, Fremantle, Giants and Hawks for the run home through there. So I can't see Hawthorn tagging the final game of the year. Just no benefit in that point of the year. Sydney might try and run Mills or a row bottom type. Maybe Mills stands alongside Bont and row bottom runs with him this week. But yeah, for me, and then Harms might have a little bit of a role on him, but he's just so damaging, isn't he? Give me a couple more of you guys that you got there for me, Jordox.
So Mitch Duncan, there was a bit talked about him last week.
Yes.
And just sort of taking that a bit more of a Tom Stewart role. I'm not sure if he did exactly that, but he certainly scored very well. And he's at a nice price. The other one is, so this is a bit of a left of centre one, is a guy like Zach Butters, who... And this is easy for me because I haven't owned him this year. So there'll be people...
So there's no scar tissue for you. Yeah, okay.
No. But he is that sort of guy, isn't he? That could could have a run of
Without
a 5 or 6 week block
Go
that
105.
makes us all
Yep.
that makes us all pick him next year because he's cheap, and then he he screws us over again. But no, he's set to return this week for power. I think there's a big 6 weeks for him.
Yeah.
If he can stay fit and keep that midfield role, he's so much better than what he's been doing. And his price in DT's 612, fantasy he's probably similar. 614, and then Supercoach I'm not sure, but 471 Supercoach. Yeah, look, if you're on a budget and you're not faint-hearted.
And I think that's the key because he's getting the midfield opportunity. It's just for a variety of different elements and variables, it's not quite landed his way. But on the games that it has, well, that's where we've seen what made him so popular as a starting squad selection. So, again, those with a bit of scar tissue around him probably want nothing to do with Zach, but those that are just hunting value and a cash strapped and a trade strapped, so they're kind of like, man, I got not much manoeuvring here. What's the best bang for my buck? Yeah, Butters could be. I think there's another one for me I like. I know you've got heaps more to kind of get through. I think it's only an AFL fantasy trade for me because, again, we've already listed probably Bailey Smith and Tim English. A lot of people in those formats will be wanting to squeeze and trade into them, let alone guys that have got the Tarantos and the Dunkleys and the Cornelios already rolling through there. But if you are cash-strapped, I really like Steel side bottom in AFL fantasy. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
625k in AF. 4 scores over 90 in the last 5. And Collingwood have arguably the best fixture over the next 3 weeks. They play North Melbourne this week, Adelaide the week after, and Essendon the week following that. So it is risky as, but when you're only spending 625k, you've got a guy that on legacy, we know what he can be. He's been a 100 guy for the better part of his whole career. But over the past 5 weeks, 4 scores, 90 plus, Collingwood have been a lot more in control of the football. It's why we're seeing them be genuinely touted as a finals contender. He's probably not going to pop you 100, but if you can pop you some 90s over the next 3 weeks at that price point, I don't hate it. It's for that very fixture. I'd be holding Dacos too, because Northie might not get heaps of the ball, but Adelaide are notorious for poor inside 50 entries. He'll just mop up everything. And the Bombers' forward line is really unpredictable in terms of what they deliver. So for me, if I was a Dacos owner, I would say if he's on the field, keep him. If you're not putting him on the field, I think he goes 100 over the next 3 weeks as well. Why are you wasting 100 on your bench unless you're holding an injured guy through there? Turn him into something that's going to improve your field positioning at that point in time. So, yeah, I'd be holding Dacos and keeping him on field. And, you know, you mentioned a value guy. For me, Steele's a value guy.
Well, Steele, side bottom is hit 90s 4 out of the last 5 in that format. But there was a week, and the stats don't show this, it was against the Giants the week before last. He was on, I reckon, 80-odd.
Yep.
Nearly 80 at halftime. Obviously a terrible second half.
Yeah.
But anyone that can score 70
like
to 80 and a half is a guy you should consider. Yeah, I like side bottom. I like him and Butters, very similar prices, and probably pretty similar scoring variants.
Yeah, good shout.
Have ceilings, but could let you down also.
Yep. I got 2 more and a comment on 2 teams. Have you got 4 or 5 more you want to get through?
No, I'll just say one more.
Okay.
That's a real play, and then I'll just do 2 or 3, maybe more relevant to draft. Okay. Yeah. So, well, just Bailey Dale was someone else.
Yeah, I like
last
that.
Week with Caleb Daniel out. You know, he's been flirting with being picked anyway this year, Dale, after what he did last year. Hasn't quite hit those heights. Yeah, he's had a pretty fair year, actually.
Well, he's gone at 93 in AFL Fantasy and 106 in Supercoach for the year. So more than fine.
That's better than I thought. Yeah. And And then, we just saw last week, Dream Team Fantasy, he scored nearly a 120.
Yeah, went 134 in Supercoach too.
Yeah, in his Daniel's absence, I should say.
And we've got another 2 to 3 weeks of no Caleb Daniel.
Correct, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like that as a shout. It's a good one.
Yep. And then I'll just run through a few other names.
Sure.
Like I said, when I have my draft hat on, but I think if you're desperate to climb rankings and you don't have money, these are some names to have a look at. So Jaden Stevenson has been woeful, let's be honest, from a fantasy perspective this year. He showed so much promise last year. I really thought he was one to consider, but he's been terrible, playing deep forward, little spurts throughout the midfield. Not in a great team, to be fair to him. Anyway, on the weekend, Aaron Hall went down, which was very painful for some.
Yes.
And Stevenson seemed to slot into that role down back. He was taking kick-ins. He was kind of everywhere in that back half. So in Dream Team and Fantasy, he put on, I think, around 90 points after quarter time. He will be very, very cheap.
He will.
Fantasy's 500 and something, probably similar in DT. It's a tricky one, but something to have a look at. Hall's injury is a low-grade calf, I believe.
Yeah, he's a couple of weeks away.
Might only be a couple of weeks, but with Bailey Scott also out.
Yep.
Something to look at.
Yeah, don't mind it.
A couple others. Jared Berry, who was someone we all sort of had a look at.
Start of the year, starting to pop, isn't he?
He is, and Zorko's out for 1 week, they say, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was longer. In Fantasy and Dream Team, Jared Berry's now hit 3 tons in his last 5.
Yeah.
He'll be cheap. And the other one is very left to centre, probably just the draft. Well, it's just Oleg Markov.
Nice.
Let me explain. He was good last year. He's been in and out of the side this year. But the Gold Coast have lost so many of those similar players. We know Lockie Bella went down a while ago. We've just seen poor Connor Buderick do his knee again. Unfortunately, Will Powell had that horrific injury. I think that was against the Crows.
Yep.
It doesn't leave much. So Markov is going to be playing, I reckon, that dashing halfback up the wing, up the ground, halfback role. I think he's hit some high 70s in his last 2 weeks. Probably more of a draft shout.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that as a draft shout. Like, you're not going to get this player from a draft perspective that I'm suggesting, because I couldn't advocate for him in a classic format of the game. But James Jordan, let me tell you why. Now, in Ultimate Footy, he's owned in, I think it's like 89% of teams. So you're not waiver wiring or player pooling. But from a seasonal average versus what he's been doing over the last 5, you might be able to just jag a sneaky one there. Because in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team for the year, he's averaging 77.7. And yet over the last 5, he's pumped out scores that are much better than that. 87, 91, 124, 87, 91. While in Supercoach, if you look at what he's done in total over the season, he's averaging 83.6. And yet over the last 5, well and truly delivering over and above that. 74, 102, 135, 93, 97. Oh, by the way, 2 weeks before that, he also turned up in Supercoach. So it might be more of a Swifty type of trade that you could pick him up, where his overall season stats aren't compelling, but his recent form is quite strong. So I don't mind that, depending on what you got to pay. But the only really obvious guy that I think people are still sleeping on in fantasy footy across the board, he's not unique, but it's Christian Petrarca. He's $803,000 in AFL Fantasy, $526,000 in Supercoach, $798K in DT. Very, very popular pick. It was baffling to me to see that people were trading him out at his buy, because this dude is amazing value for money, given in the fact that I don't see why he won't go 110 plus in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and 120 in Supercoach over these next 7 weeks. I genuinely think he's going to be that guy. And so you're only trading into him for value, not as separation from the crowd, because chances are rankings or league opponents have him. But if you're like, man, I just need a pretty cheap F set, M8 that's going to be as good as anybody, CP5 for me.
Yeah, I like Petrarca. I was one that sat on him, and
Well done.
I looked at his price last week. No, as in didn't jump on him is what I mean.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, not well done.
And, well, and I mentioned it earlier, I'm more conservative. I like to just when I like. And I was watching against our Crows, and he was playing more forward, and part of me thought, "Oh, that's good. He'll score lower." I'm glad, but it actually helped him. It freed him up to obviously kick goals.
Sure,
he hasn't done for a while. I think he kicked 3 or 4.
Yeah, kicked 3 straight. First time he's done that for a while.
And now sides approaching a Melbourne game, you're now going to be thinking, well, we could tag Petrarca, but if he's starting forward, that kind of complicates it. Let's just tag Oliver instead. We'll make that our focus. I just can see that working in his favour, Petrarca, in the next 5-6 weeks. And he's, I agree with everything you say. He's an absolute bargain and should be in your plans if you don't have him. No,
fair enough. Look, the other two teams that have really nice fixtures is Hawthorn and Sydney. But from a Hawthorn perspective, I don't want to trade into any of them. Like, I just don't want to. Tom Mitchell had a good score on the weekend, but that game was made for him.
You could twist my arm on Tom Mitchell. I'm a sucker for that.
I would see why the attraction is, but for me, Sam Mitchell's cards have been shown about how he wants that midfield to run.
You know what you're getting. If you jump into Tom Mitchell now, you can't complain.
Yeah, you can't go, where's my 120 for the year? You're going, okay, you're going to go between 85 to 110 for the year. And you might pop a little bit of gravy on a few games. But we talked about teams that are on the run home. Look, the only reason you would do it with Tom Mitchell is if some significant injuries happen to the Hawks and they put away some of their kids and they're now playing for trade currency of Tom. That's the only reason. And you've just got to jump blind to that. So I wouldn't do it. No other Hawk I'm interested in. Sicily, if you have him, fine. I know you put him as a trade-out option, but in terms of trade into, absolutely not. And then Sydney's the other one. But I've got no confidence in Lloyd, even at this cheap price. Mills, you are now a couple of weeks away from getting him as value. And then Heaney, if you've dodged that bullet this year, continue to play dodge, is all I'll say. As good as their fixture is, he's not getting midfield minutes, so he's going to require goals to get him there for a score. And when you've got someone like a Bailey Smith and Tim English likely to come into your team, even for value, I don't want Isaac Heaney. So that's my kind of last comment on them. You did mention Petrarca and a potential that he played more forward. I'll be very clear, I would be gobsmacked if he picked up forward status at the end of this round, so no one bank on that. But we do have another bunch of DPPs coming into the game at the end of the round. There's an article going up first thing Thursday morning, so it might be already at coachespanel.tv for you to go and check it out right now. Our Patreons have got it already, though, so they can go and check that out right now about who I think are the best bets to get DPP. Are there any names for you that you're kind of sniffing around before we wrap up the episode? You're sniffing around going, geez, I'd love this bloke to get an additional position.
Oh, there's a few I'd love to get the position, whether they are eligible or even relevant. No, if I'm honest, being a long-time dream teamer, the position changes are still quite new to me, and I actually forgot that was coming up again. So, no, that hasn't been on my my radar, but looking forward to the article you put out and sniffing around for one. That could be a really smart way to end the year.
Well, there is one that I'm not saying is going to get it, but could get it. And if they get it, it will change the dynamic of your forward line for the final 6 weeks of the year. You can check that out at coachespanel.tv. Well done, everybody. Yeah. Thank you so much for getting involved in the episode. Jordox, he's gone. He's off on daddy daycare duty. If you want to read any of the articles that we've dropped this week, you can find them at coachespanel.tv. And our Patreons, who we talked about too. All the details to find that group of supporters. It's how you show support to the Coaches Panel and get extra bonuses just for doing it. You can find the links for that at coachespanel.tv. Enjoy the round of footy, and we'll chat to you next week.